He was just an aging German shepherd, retired, tired, and forgotten. She was just a scared teenage girl, alone, unloved, and hunted. And he, just a man haunted by a baby he couldn't save. But one snowy night, fate brought them together. A trash bin, a dying infant, and a bark that stopped time. That bark wasn't noise, it was a prayer, a miracle, and it saved 3 lives. If you believe God still works through animals, through people, through impossible timing, share this video. Comment Amen to bless those who keep fighting in silence. Subscribe for more stories of quiet faith, healing, and divine purpose. And may God bless you, wherever your journey is tonight. Aurora, Colorado, wore its silence like a shawl that night. Snow fell in slow spirals through the yellow halos of streetlights, blanketing sidewalks, rooftops, and mailboxes in a hushed, icy stillness. It was just past midnight, and most of the town was asleep, their chimneys puffing soft clouds into the black sky. On the corner of Birch and Hollow Creek Lane, a patrol cruiser idled, its headlights dimmed, casting faint beams into the swirling white. Inside, Sergeant Logan Bennett sat in the driver's seat, gloved hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. He exhaled, fogging up the windshield, and then reached for the door. Logan was 41, broad-shouldered, with a wiry frame hardened by decades of service, first in the Marines, then as a police officer. He wore his past in the lines carved around his eyes, in the stiffness of his right knee, and in the quiet way he carried himself. His hair was a deep ash brown with flecks of gray, cropped military short. His uniform was clean, but not crisp, worn at the elbows and faintly dusted with salt from dried snow. He was the kind of man who said little but noticed everything. Since returning from Afghanistan, Logan had developed the habit of walking his beat in silence, especially at night. He didn't trust quietness anymore, not after what he saw buried beneath it in war zones. At his side, hopping down with a soft thud, was Ranger, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat and amber eyes that missed nothing. He moved with the precision of a soldier and the dignity of a monarch, even though his muzzle had started to gray and one ear folded slightly at the tip from an old injury. Ranger had been Logan's partner overseas, trained to detect IEDs, lead search and rescue in collapsed buildings, and once, even to comfort a wounded boy until the medics arrived. He had saved lives, and now, in his retirement, he walked the sleepy streets of Aurora like a sentinel with no war left to fight. "Let's stretch our legs, boy," Logan murmured, tugging his scarf tighter against the cold. The two moved down the block, Logan's boots crunching faintly in the snow, Ranger's paws silent. The wind carried the scent of pine, diesel, and faintly something acrid. Up ahead, a garbage truck idled at the curb, its back lit by red hazard lights blinking slow and steady. It was the last run of the night for the sanitation crew. "Quiet night," Logan said absently. But Ranger didn't respond. He stopped. His body went rigid, tail low, head high. Then came the growl, low, guttural, almost vibrating the air around them. Logan turned just in time to see the shepherd lunge forward, barking with such violence that it echoed down the empty street like gunfire. "Ranger!" Logan stepped forward, caught the leash, and steadied the dog. But Ranger wouldn't calm. He barked again, sharp, rapid, urgent. His body faced the garbage truck, particularly the bin hoisted halfway in the air by the mechanical arms. The sanitation worker stepped out of the cab, wiping his nose with a gloved hand. He was a man in his 50s, stocky, with a thick coat and a neon vest stained with old grime. "Everything okay there, officer?" Logan raised his hand. "Yeah, he's just," but his voice trailed. "That bark, it wasn't a casual woof or a warning to a stray cat. It was that bark, the one from Kandahar, the one that meant death might be nearby." "Stop the lift," Logan barked. "What?" "Drop the bin. Now." The driver scrambled back into the cab and hit the emergency stop. The arms froze midair. Logan pulled out his flashlight and ran to the back, Ranger beside him, barking again but more frantic this time. The bin swayed slightly in its frozen position. Something shifted inside, faint, soft. Logan climbed the rear step and shone his light into the dark container. At first, he saw only layers of paper, cloth, something that looked like a broken toy. Then a sound, barely audible over the truck's engine. Not metal, not mechanical. A whimper. "God," he whispered. He reached in, throwing aside towels, crushed boxes, a stained blanket. And then he saw it. A baby. So small. Curled up like a comma, wrapped in a ragged towel. The infant's skin was tinged blue, lips barely parted as the faintest cry escaped. The air smelled of old blood and plastic. Logan's hands trembled as he reached in and lifted the baby gently. The child weighed next to nothing. His chest rose in shallow gasps. No more than a day old. "Call EMS." Logan shouted to the driver. "Now. Say it's a newborn, hypothermic, critical condition." He peeled off his jacket and wrapped the child tightly against his chest. Ranger stood next to them now, silent, his eyes locked on the baby. The barking had stopped. His duty was done. He simply watched, ears twitching, as if standing guard over something sacred. 5 minutes later, the ambulance screamed down Maple Avenue. Logan sat on the curb, holding the baby to his chest, whispering softly, "You're okay. You're safe now." Paramedics rushed in, placed an oxygen mask on the child, wrapped him in heated blankets, started a neonatal 4. The driver of the truck stood nearby, pale and shaking. "I didn't hear nothing. I didn't see," his voice trailed. Logan nodded slowly. "He did," he said, placing a hand on Ranger's head. He saw. Later, as the ambulance pulled away, Logan stayed behind. Snow continued to fall, soft and unforgiving. Porch lights flickered. The neighborhood returned to stillness. Logan looked down at Ranger. "You never stopped being a soldier, huh?" he said. Ranger didn't wag his tail. He didn't move. He just stood, alert, solemn, watching the spot where the baby had been found. Just as he had done once, in a ruined building in southern Afghanistan, where a baby's cry came too late. That night, Logan hadn't made it in time. But tonight was different. And as he walked slowly back to the cruiser, Ranger at his side, Logan knew. The past didn't have to define what he failed to do. Sometimes, just sometimes, a second chance came wrapped in snow and silence, and a single bark. The automatic doors to Aurora County Medical Center parted with a reluctant hiss as Logan stepped into the sterile brightness, his arms still cradling the swaddled newborn. The sudden change from the biting cold to the hospital's warm, disinfectant-scented air made his face flush, but he didn't slow his pace. Behind him, Ranger padded quietly, his paws clicking softly on the tile floor, his amber eyes sweeping the corridor like a silent sentinel. A nurse at the intake station looked up with alarm. Her name badge read Janice, and she was a stout woman in her early 50s with a halo of auburn curls and a pair of glasses perpetually sliding down her nose. She moved with practiced efficiency and motherly authority. "Code Blue Infant." Logan barked. "Found abandoned. Hypothermic. He's breathing, but shallow. No visible trauma." Janice didn't waste a second. She hit a button under her desk and yelled down the hallway, "Dr. Armitage to Trauma Bay 2. Neonatal alert." Then she motioned to a gurney being wheeled by an orderly. "Get him there now." Logan placed the fragile bundle onto the stretcher with the same care he'd used years ago to handle injured civilians in war zones. The baby let out a soft whimper as warm hands wrapped him in new blankets. Oxygen was fitted to his tiny face, and monitors came to life around him. Logan didn't move from the side. Neither did Ranger. They were led quickly to a trauma bay with high white walls and the hum of machines that filled the quiet like anxious thoughts. A doctor swept in moments later, a tall, clean-shaven man in his late 40s with crow's feet carved into his pale face and a voice that carried calm like an anchor in a storm. Dr. Simon Armitage, head of pediatric emergency, was known for being blunt, brilliant, and deeply weary. He had seen too many cold babies, as the nurses called them, and not all had made it. He examined the infant silently, his gloved fingers moving with precision, checking reflexes, skin tone, pupils. "Temperature's low," he muttered to the nurse. "Get the warming unit prepped. I want fluids started. What's his APGAR?" 4, Janice answered, biting her lip. Logan watched, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until Ranger nudged his leg with his nose. The familiar pressure grounded him. He looked down and saw the shepherd's gaze fixed on the child, unwavering, ears forward, as if the dog's very presence could will the infant to survive. "Officer," a voice spoke gently from behind him. Logan turned to see a woman standing just outside the trauma curtain. She was in her late 20s, slim but not frail, with a tall posture that suggested discipline. Her black hair was tied neatly in a low bun, a few wisps escaping to frame her olive-toned face. Her scrubs bore the embroidered name, Hannah Ruiz, NICU nurse. Her eyes were wide and dark, the kind of eyes that had seen pain but never stopped looking anyway. There was a quiet empathy in her tone, the kind built not in textbooks but in the trenches of long night shifts, loss, and small victories. "Would you come with me, Sergeant? They need space to work, and I'll update you in just a few minutes," she said softly. Logan hesitated, reluctant to leave, but he nodded and followed her down the hallway into a small glass-walled consultation room. Ranger followed without a sound, settling immediately by the door like a statue carved from loyalty. Hannah poured Logan a paper cup of lukewarm coffee from a machine in the corner. "It's not good, but it's warm." "Thanks," Logan said, his voice hoarse. He took it mostly for the comfort of holding something. "You said you found him in a trash bin?" she asked, pulling a chair across from him. "Yeah, back of a garbage truck. Just in time." If Ranger hadn't barked, he trailed off, staring into the coffee as if it could explain why some people threw away babies like yesterday's newspaper. Hannah nodded, expression unreadable. "Some people say it takes evil to do something like that. I don't always agree. Sometimes it's fear, or desperation, or someone else pulling the strings." Logan looked at her closely for the first time. She spoke like someone who knew. "You've seen this before?" he asked. "Not exactly this," she replied, her voice tightening. "But I was abandoned. At a fire station. No note. No name. Just a blanket with a tear in the corner. I was raised in foster care, bounced between homes like a lost suitcase. Some were fine. Some were not." There was a pause. Logan didn't pry. He let her fill the silence or leave it alone. Hannah smiled weakly. "Anyway, I became a nurse. Because someone needs to be the one who holds these kids when their parents won't." There it was, the steel under her calm. A woman forged in neglect, but shaped by resolve. Before Logan could reply, a knock on the glass startled them both. Dr. Armitage stood there, arms crossed over his chest. "He's stable," the doctor said, walking in. "We got him warm. No signs of trauma. No drugs. Cord was cut clean. Someone had access to basic tools. This wasn't done in panic. It was done with intent." Logan's jaw tightened. So he wasn't just left. He was discarded. Possibly. But here's what matters, he has a chance. You gave him that. "Not me," Logan said, glancing at Ranger. "He did." Dr. Armitage gave a faint nod to the dog. "Then give him a steak, Sergeant." Back in the waiting area, Logan and Ranger sat quietly. The snow outside had turned heavier, blurring the city beyond the glass walls of the hospital. Inside, it was warm, bright, too clean to feel real. Ranger stared at the ICU door with complete focus, his body tense but still. Nurses passed by, some smiling at the sight of the dog. One even paused to scratch behind his ear. He didn't react. His eyes stayed on the hallway, as if daring anything or anyone to try and reach the baby. Hannah returned, carrying a clipboard. She knelt beside Ranger and whispered, "You're something else, aren't you?" Then she looked up at Logan. "They're moving the baby to NICU. We're calling him Baby Aurora for now. Do you want to be listed as the reporting officer?" Logan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. Let me know if you need anything." He stood and looked down at Ranger. "We wait," he said. Ranger's ears twitched, his tail thumped once. And so they sat, a soldier and a dog, guarding a child they didn't know. Because sometimes, in the middle of the night, in the quiet hum of a hospital hallway, a second chance didn't just arrive. It had to be defended. The snow in Aurora had stopped falling by morning, but the silence it left behind still clung to the streets like breath on a frozen window. The city had that soft, brittle calm after a storm. Cars moved slower, people spoke quieter, and the wind carried whispers instead of howls. Sergeant Logan Bennett stood at the edge of Birch and Hollow Creek Lane, the same spot where Ranger had frozen the night before, his body stiff and barking like his soul was on fire. Now, in daylight, the scene looked different. Plowed streets and shoveled driveways dulled the urgency of last night's chaos. But Logan knew better. The world might move on fast, but truth tended to linger in the places most people overlooked. Ranger sniffed along the curb with focused intent, tail low, nose darting left and right like a radar. Logan held the leash loosely, trusting the old shepherd to guide him. They moved slowly along the snow-packed sidewalk, boots crunching, paws whispering. Near a row of overflowing bins behind a shuttered bakery, Ranger stopped cold, his body angling toward a small depression in the snow beneath a leaning wooden fence. Logan crouched and brushed away the layer of powder. There it was, a torn piece of flannel, red and white with a faded cartoon pattern. The edge was stained a dark brown. Blood, maybe. He slipped it into a plastic evidence pouch. Beside the fabric, Ranger nosed another object half buried in ice. Logan leaned in and uncovered a damp baby wipe, still faintly scented, wrapped tightly and pressed into the snow like it had been hidden in a hurry. Then, caught between two frozen leaves, a crumpled piece of lined notebook paper, edges soaked, ink running. Logan unfolded it with gloved hands. The writing was shaky, smeared in places, but still readable. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I just wanted him to live." Logan exhaled, long and quiet. His fingers curled tighter around the page. Behind him, a garage door creaked open. A woman stepped out onto her porch in slippers and a down coat that looked 2 sizes too big. Her name was Mrs. Eliza Monroe, a retired librarian in her 70s with short white hair and sharp hazel eyes behind thick lenses. She was known in the neighborhood for always knowing just a little more than she let on, and for never missing her 5 a.m. tea by the window. "Sergeant Bennett?" she called, pulling her coat tighter. "That your dog again?" Logan straightened. "Yes, ma'am. Sorry if we woke you last night." Eliza waved her hand. "Oh, I haven't slept properly since '02. You think this has to do with that baby I heard on the scanner?" Logan didn't answer directly. "You see or hear anything unusual around 3 in the morning?" She tilted her head. "Now that you mention it, I did hear wheels. Plastic wheels, like one of those toy wagons. But heavier, rolling on ice. And footsteps. Small, not rushed. More like hesitant. Male or female? Too soft to say. But light. Definitely not a grown man." Logan nodded, made a mental note. "Thank you." Eliza peered down at Ranger, who stood alert beside him. "He's a good boy," she said. "The best," Logan replied. Back in the cruiser, Logan laid out the evidence on the passenger seat. The cloth scrap, the wipe, the note. Ranger curled in the back, his breath fogging the windows, but his eyes remained fixed on the outside world. Logan's fingers hovered over the note again. The writing struck something in him, something personal, raw. He pulled out his wallet and removed an old folded photograph. It was creased from years of travel, corners frayed. It showed a younger Logan, standing beside his father, John Bennett, a man built like a tree trunk with hands always tucked into his belt. Behind them, a police cruiser from 1985 glinted under the summer sun. John had been the town's most respected officer, stern but fair, a man who believed that even the smallest act of kindness was worth doing right. He died 10 years ago, heart failure in the line of duty. Logan still remembered the last piece of advice his father gave him, spoken while they stood over a stolen bicycle case that no one else cared about. "Every scrap of evidence," John had said, "is someone whispering for help. Your job's to hear it, even if they don't know they're whispering." Logan pressed the photo back into his wallet and looked at Ranger in the rearview mirror. "We hear it now, don't we?" he said quietly. "And this time we're not walking away." At the station, Logan turned the findings over to the evidence team. The technician on shift was Caleb Tran, a lanky, soft-spoken man in his early 30s with a background in forensic science and a wardrobe that mostly consisted of black hoodies and cargo pants. He wore noise-canceling headphones even when the lab was silent, claiming it helped him concentrate. Caleb took the items without small talk, his eyes flicking quickly over each object. "You want a priority analysis?" "As fast as you can," Logan said. "Especially the blood. We need DNA, even partial." Caleb nodded, typing notes with rhythmic precision. "Give me 48 hours. Logan left the lab and made his way to the squad room. Ranger followed, tail swishing slowly. A few officers nodded in recognition. Most kept their distance. Ranger had that aura about him, half legend, half ghost. In his office, Logan sat at his desk and pulled up the case notes. No missing infant reports. No reports of a pregnant teenager gone silent. Nothing on the local shelters. Nothing on nearby clinics, at least not yet. He stared at the computer screen, its blue glow making the shadows under his eyes deeper. Then, leaning back, he muttered, "Someone out there made a terrible choice for the right reason. But someone else may have helped them make it." Ranger let out a short huff from the doorway, his way of agreeing. Outside, the wind picked up again, sweeping fresh flakes across the street. But inside the precinct, a new storm was quietly forming. Not one of weather, but of unanswered questions, invisible footprints, and a dog that refused to forget. The frost hadn't lifted from the sidewalks of Aurora, Colorado. The morning light had a grayish tint, as if the sun had chosen not to fully commit. Trees stood bare and thin, their limbs etched against the sky like old veins. On Birch Street, the air still clung to silence, thick and woolen. But in Logan Bennett's mind, the city buzzed with invisible questions, their answers buried beneath snow, fear, and secrets left unsaid. Inside the precinct's small surveillance room, a video replayed in grainy black and white. A security camera, angled down from the second-story window of a duplex across from the bakery, had finally been pulled. The footage was time-stamped 3:02 a.m., less than an hour before Logan and Ranger saved the baby. The footage showed a figure stepping out from a narrow alley between two houses. She was small, wrapped in a heavy hoodie with the hood drawn so low it cast her face into shadow. Her arms gripped a bulky plastic container, both hands trembling under its weight. The figure moved slowly, more hesitation than stealth, crossed the sidewalk, placed the container near the garbage bins, and lingered for a moment. Then, as if something inside her cracked, she reached down, adjusted the blanket slightly, and whispered something inaudible before retreating into the mist and vanishing down the alley. She didn't run, Logan murmured, watching closely. She waited. Beside him, Detective Eva Marlowe leaned against the wall with her arms crossed. Eva was in her early 40s, tall and lean, always dressed like someone ready to step into a courtroom or a firefight, black slacks, pressed blouse, and a shoulder holster worn like second skin. Her face was angular, her jaw tight, and her eyes sharp with the weary experience of too many child protection cases. She cared, Eva said, folding her arms tighter. She didn't toss the bin and bolt. That's not cruelty. That's fear. She glanced toward Logan. You think it's the girl from the note? Same height, same posture, Logan said. Same time frame. Ranger's still keyed in on that block. Logan stepped outside with Ranger at his side. The air smelled of salt, snowmelt, and diesel. They walked back toward the neighborhood with slow, deliberate steps, stopping at the exact alley where the figure had appeared. Ranger paused, nose twitching, then pulled slightly toward the right, away from the camera angle, toward a row of weather-worn houses behind a vacant parking lot. The fourth house down stood out, not because it was abandoned or decrepit, but because it tried too hard not to be noticed. The siding was pale gray, the shutters crooked. A broken porch light swung slightly in the breeze. The mailbox read Harper. As Logan approached, Ranger stopped, ears stiff, tail stiffened, but not raised in aggression. He moved slowly toward the trash bins lined against the fence and sat. Not barked, not growled, just sat. Logan looked around. No movement, no curtains twitching. He knocked once on the frame of the side gate. No answer. Let's check the perimeter, he murmured. They moved around the side yard, boots crunching gravel. Behind the bins, nestled between a stack of flattened cardboard and a broken wooden chair, was a curled-up figure. It was a girl. She wore a threadbare hoodie, too large for her small frame, jeans ripped at the knees, and sneakers soaked through from snow. Her face was smudged with dirt, her lips pale, and her shoulders quivered as if her bones no longer trusted warmth. She had her back pressed to the wall, and her knees tucked under her chin. Her eyes were closed, her breath shallow. Ranger stopped just 2 feet away and lay down. Quiet. Still. The girl blinked once. Then again. Her eyes landed on Ranger. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. Instead, her face crumpled, and a sound escaped her lips, a sob, quiet and raw. Logan crouched low. "It's okay," he said, his voice even. "You're safe. Nobody's here to hurt you." She shook her head. "You shouldn't be here. He said he'd find me if I told anyone." "What's your name?" Logan asked gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "Maddie. Maddie Carter." Her voice was barely audible, like the sound of paper tearing. "I'm Sergeant Bennett," Logan said. "This is Ranger." Maddie glanced at the dog again. "He's not like the others," she whispered. "He didn't bark." Logan smiled faintly. "He only barks at danger. He doesn't see any in you." Tears slid down her cheeks. Is he alive? The baby?" "He's alive," Logan said. "Stable. At the hospital. They're calling him Baby Aurora for now." Maddie pressed her face into her arms and wept. It took time, an hour, maybe more, for her to gather enough pieces of herself to speak clearly. She didn't say much at first. Just fragments. That she was 16. That she had been hiding the pregnancy. That she had given birth alone in the bathtub with a towel between her teeth, so she wouldn't scream loud enough for the neighbors to hear. That afterward, she wrapped the baby in what she could find and walked through the snow, praying someone would hear him before the truck came. But the most chilling part came later, when she mentioned the man who lived in the house. "My mom's boyfriend," she said. "Earl." She spat the name like it burned. "He said if I told anyone, he'd make the baby disappear. Said girls like me don't get to be moms. Said I had no right." Logan's stomach turned. "Where is he now?" "Gone," she said. "Left last night after drinking. Said he'd come back for me after the trash went out." Logan glanced at Ranger. The dog was still lying beside Maddie, his head tilted slightly, watching her with those calm, ancient eyes. For the first time in years, Maddie didn't shrink from closeness. She leaned slightly toward the warmth. A patrol unit arrived 10 minutes later. Logan helped Maddie to her feet and wrapped her in his own coat. Before she climbed into the back seat, she turned to Ranger. "Thank you," she said simply. Ranger gave no response, only blinked slowly. But somehow that was enough. The storm had returned by nightfall. Wind cut through the streets of Aurora like a blade honed by memory, howling low between buildings, pushing snow in wild spirals across abandoned parking lots and quiet suburban corners. Inside the warm confines of Aurora County's Child Protective Services building, the air was heavy with heat and tension. Logan Bennett stood near the frosted window, one hand resting on Ranger's head, the other gripping a styrofoam cup of stale coffee he hadn't sipped in 15 minutes. Across the room, caseworker Lauren Brandt rifled through a folder thick with forms and evaluations. She was in her late 30s, with chestnut hair tied into a no-nonsense bun, tall and broad-shouldered with a presence that balanced both compassion and authority. Her dark green blazer looked like it hadn't wrinkled in years, and she wore boots instead of heels, sensible for winter and necessary for her line of work. "We've secured a safe house on the West End," she said, without looking up. "Unlisted address, unmarked mailbox. 2 other minors there, 1 caregiver. Maddie will have her own room. It's not permanent, but it's stable. That's the best we can offer right now." Logan nodded but said nothing. His mind was elsewhere, specifically back at the hospital, when Maddie had whispered, "He said he'd come for me after the trash went out." That voice hadn't left his head, and neither had the image of her curled behind a garbage bin, shaking from more than just cold. Maddie sat in a folding chair beside the radiator, wrapped in a blanket someone had handed her, her head tilted downward. Her face was freshly scrubbed but still pale, eyes red-rimmed. She hadn't spoken since the ride over, not even when Ranger laid his head on her knee. She only reached out and placed one hand on his fur like a lifeline she wasn't sure she deserved. Lauren approached her slowly. "Maddie, we're ready if you are." The girl looked up and nodded. They moved as a group, Logan, Lauren, Maddie, and Ranger, through the back entrance of the building where an unmarked vehicle waited, engine humming in the cold. Snow whipped across the lot in slanted streaks. Logan helped Maddie into the back seat, Ranger sitting beside her. Lauren drove, hands steady on the wheel, her eyes flicking to the mirrors every few seconds. The safe house was nestled on a dead-end road behind a shuttered veterinary clinic, a squat brick home with darkened windows and a single porch light that flickered once before settling into a steady glow. Dorothy Yates, the live-in caregiver, greeted them at the door. She was in her 60s, with gray hair worn in a neat braid, and a build like an old farmhouse, sturdy, functional, weathered but warm. She had the type of gaze that measured people quietly and filed away everything they didn't say. "Maddie, welcome," she said simply, her voice like gravel and honey. "Come inside. The heat's good and the tea's better." Maddie managed a nod, stepping inside with Ranger at her heels. Logan stayed behind, watching her silhouette vanish into the hallway. The warmth of the house made his skin itch after the freezing air. He stood in the doorway until Dorothy turned to him. "She's been through something most grown women wouldn't survive," she said quietly. "She's not broken, but she's fraying. You know the type?" Logan gave a faint smile. "I was raised by one." Dorothy nodded. "Then you understand." By the time Logan returned to the precinct, the snow had thickened again. Ranger climbed into his usual spot in the back of the cruiser, curling tightly as if the emotional weight of the evening had worn him out. Logan sat in the driver's seat and just stared ahead. Inside the station, Captain Mike Rourke called him in. Rourke was a square-jawed man with graying temples and a voice that carried like a judge's gavel. He had once served with Logan's father and carried a quiet affection for Logan that manifested only in offers of coffee or growls of disapproval. "They're asking if you'd consider temporary guardianship," Rourke said bluntly, sliding a packet of paperwork across his desk. Logan raised an eyebrow. "Me? You're the one she trusts. You're the one who found the baby. And CPS is short on long-term placements for girls like Maddie who are halfway between child and adult." Logan didn't respond right away. He looked at the first page, questions about income, housing, discipline, philosophy references. It looked like a job application for a role he'd never prepared for. "Look," Rourke added, softening slightly, "I'm not pushing. I just know when a man holds a kid like that and doesn't flinch, it usually means something." Logan thought back to the hospital. Holding baby Aurora, Sky now, the nurses had started calling him that. His tiny hand gripping Logan's shirt. That fragile breath. That terrifying weight. And somehow it had felt right. Not easy, but right. "I'll think about it," he said, standing. "Let me talk to Lauren first." It was close to midnight when Logan stopped by St. Mary's Medical Center. The corridors were quieter now, nurses moving like shadows, monitors humming softly behind closed doors. He found Hannah Ruiz in the NICU, humming faintly as she adjusted an oxygen line. Her dark eyes lit up when she saw him. "Hey," she whispered. "He's doing well. Gaining strength. Feeding properly." Logan stepped closer to the incubator. Sky's face was less pale now, more flushed. His fingers twitched in sleep, his chest rising with stronger rhythm. "I might take them in," Logan said suddenly. Hannah didn't blink. "Maddie and the baby?" "Temporarily. Maybe longer." There was a long pause. Then she smiled. "You know, some people are born into family. Others find it when it's falling apart." Logan exhaled, feeling something settle in his chest like a truth too long buried. Ranger stood at the doorway, silent, watchful. He hadn't moved, not since they arrived. The next morning, Ranger stirred early and padded to the window of Logan's living room, ears perked. Outside, the street looked untouched, blanketed in silence. Logan stood beside him, a mug of lukewarm coffee in hand. They were no longer just on patrol. Now they were guarding something fragile, something worth staying for. The snow had crusted over, hardened into brittle ice that crackled underfoot like bones left too long in the cold. Aurora was quiet that evening, too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes not from peace, but from something holding its breath. Logan Bennett sat in his cruiser a block away from the safe house, the engine idling low, windshield fogging around the edges. He was watching, waiting. And Ranger, curled in the passenger seat instead of the back, kept his muzzle resting on the dashboard, ears twitching with every passing gust of wind. The call had come earlier that day from Lauren Brandt. Maddie had seemed unsettled since breakfast, more withdrawn than usual. She hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken much during check-in. But what disturbed Lauren most wasn't what Maddie said. It was what she did. She kept glancing at the window like she expected someone to be there. Like she'd seen a ghost. Dorothy Yates confirmed it. She asked me if the blinds could stay shut all night, she'd said over the phone. Said she thought she saw him again. Him. Logan didn't need to ask who him was. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. The cruiser's radio buzzed faintly with meaningless dispatches. Petty theft, a road closure on Elm, a minor fender bender outside the shopping plaza. Nothing that mattered here, not compared to this. A girl hiding from a man who said he'd find her, and a baby who didn't even know the weight of the world he'd been born into. At precisely 2:17 a.m., Ranger stiffened. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle lift of his head, a narrowing of his eyes, a shift in posture that Logan had come to know too well. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't growl. He watched. Still. Silent. Logan followed his gaze. Across the street, near the tree line, a figure stood in the shadows. A man tall, wearing a heavy coat, hood drawn low, unmoving. The glow from a nearby porch light was just enough to catch the glint of his eyes. He didn't move toward the house. He didn't knock. He just watched. Logan stepped out of the cruiser, one hand on his belt, the other gripping a flashlight. "Stay," he told Ranger. The man turned and slipped back into the darkness the moment Logan's boots hit the pavement. By the time Logan reached the edge of the trees, there was no one there, just disturbed snow, faint boot prints, and the echo of breath in the cold. He returned to the cruiser and pulled up the feed from the mobile security camera mounted near the safe house porch. Rewinding the footage, he found what he expected. The figure had stood there for nearly 5 minutes, facing the front window of Maddie's room. He never approached the door, never tried to break in, but his presence was deliberate, measured, meant to unnerve. Logan shared the footage with Detective Eva Marlowe first thing that morning. "That's not a threat," she said, reviewing the video in her office, sunlight streaking across the screen. "That's a message. He wants her to know he's watching." Eva leaned back, her fingers drumming the edge of her desk. "We'll sweep the neighborhood. Put up motion lights around the safe house. I'll have uniforms drive by every 30 minutes. Logan nodded, but he didn't feel any calmer. Later that afternoon, Logan returned to the scene with Ranger. The snow had melted just enough to expose details missed the night before. Near the rear alley behind the old veterinary clinic, Ranger caught a scent and pulled sharply on the leash. Logan followed as the dog led him down a narrow path through overgrown brush and broken fencing. At the end of the path stood an abandoned house, paint peeling from the siding, windows boarded except for one shattered pane near the back porch. Ranger's steps slowed. His tail was low, cautious. His breath came heavier than usual. Logan noticed it immediately, Ranger's fatigue. He was slower on the incline, his limbs stiff. When they reached the door, Ranger paused and sat down rather than push forward. "You okay, buddy?" Logan asked softly, kneeling beside him. Ranger didn't answer, of course, but his gaze told the truth. He was tired, not just from the walk, but from age. His once strong frame had lost some of its power. His eyes, though still sharp, now carried something softer, like a man who'd seen too much, carried too much, and still refused to stop. Logan stood and entered the house. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and old rot. The walls were covered in yellowed wallpaper and water stains. But one thing stood out. Near the living room's far wall, someone had recently scrawled something with thick black marker. Think you saved her?" The words were jagged, angry, written in uppercase letters that slanted like they were etched in a rage. Logan took a photo, bagged a scrap of torn cloth from the floor, and marked the location for patrol. When he stepped outside, Ranger was still sitting by the porch, waiting patiently. Logan reached down and scratched behind his ear. "We're not done," he murmured, "but we're getting close." That evening, Logan returned to the safe house and checked in with Dorothy and Lauren. Maddie was in her room, quietly drawing. Sky, freshly discharged and resting in a crib beside her, had begun making tiny grunting noises in his sleep, the kind that made Logan smile despite himself. Before he left, he asked Dorothy for a moment to speak with Maddie. She agreed. In the room, Maddie sat cross-legged on the bed, sketching with a pencil in a worn notebook. She looked up when Logan entered, then down at Ranger, who lay quietly at the door. "I saw him," she said before Logan could ask. "Last night, outside the window. I didn't scream." "I know," Logan replied. "You didn't have to." Maddie looked back at her sketchbook. On the page was a drawing of a dog, bold, regal, watchful. Ranger. In the background, a tiny baby nestled in a blanket. "He's not afraid of anything," she said. "He is," Logan corrected gently. "He's just too stubborn to show it." She smiled just slightly. As Logan left the room, he paused beside Ranger. The old dog stood slowly, joints creaking. "You're still not done, huh?" Logan whispered. Ranger pressed his head against Logan's knee. Just once. Then turned, ever alert, watching. The snow had turned from soft and quiet to something heavier, more resolute, an icy hush that blanketed the city like a warning. Aurora's streets, so often half asleep after midnight, felt wired now on edge. Inside his cruiser parked 2 houses down from the safe house, Logan Bennett sat unmoving, the glow of the dashboard painting tired lines across his face. Ranger lay curled in the passenger seat, his breathing steady but labored, as though his body knew something was coming before Logan did. 3:17 a.m. The same time Maddie had once crept through the dark and laid her son in a bin beside the curb, praying someone might hear his cry. Ranger's ears twitched. Then he sat up, slowly, muscles stiff, eyes locked forward. Logan followed his gaze. Movement. A figure walking along the opposite sidewalk, moving with slow deliberation, as though pacing a ritual. The man was tall, hooded, his boots crunching in rhythm, a shadow trailing him like smoke. As he neared the side of the safe house, he stopped, turned, looked up toward Maddie's window. Logan stepped from the cruiser before the cold could even sting. "Police! Hands where I can see them!" he shouted across the street. The figure bolted. Logan didn't hesitate. "Ranger, heel!" The old shepherd leapt from the seat, slower than years past, but still driven by instinct. Logan and Ranger tore across the street, boots pounding against frozen pavement, breath fogging violently in the night air. The suspect ducked into a narrow alley between 2 garages. Logan followed, flashlight beams slashing through the dark. Ranger stayed low, close to the walls, tracking not just the footsteps but the scent, something musty and sour, familiar and foul. They emerged into a side lot behind a closed laundromat. The man was already climbing a chain-link fence at the back. Logan shouted, "Stop. You're under arrest." No response. Only the heavy grunts of effort and the clatter of metal as the man dropped to the other side. Ranger moved without command. The old dog charged the fence line, turned down a side gap, and disappeared between 2 sheds. Logan followed, heart hammering, legs burning. The suspect, now visible in full under a flickering streetlight, sprinted toward the edge of a snow-covered playground. But Ranger was already there, emerging from the opposite end of the lot. He cut across the snow diagonally, head down, teeth bared. He lunged. The man stumbled, arms flailing as Ranger collided with his legs, sending him sprawling backward into the snow. Logan was on him in seconds, weapon drawn. "Don't move." The man thrashed once, trying to sit up. Ranger growled, a low, ancient sound from deep in the chest. The man froze. Logan reached down and wrenched the hood off. Eli McGrath. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw. His hair, once combed back neatly in Maddie's descriptions, was now unkempt, matted from sweat. His eyes darted wildly, equal parts fury and fear. "Back off," he hissed. "She lied. You don't know what she did." Logan ignored him, patting him down with practiced movements. He found the blade first, folding, serrated, concealed in the jacket pocket. Then another item, tucked inside the coat, a handful of printed photographs, creased and faded, but unmistakable. Maddie, at the hospital, outside the CPS building. One of her, unaware, carrying Sky in a blanket on the front porch of the safe house. Logan held up the photos, face hardening. "You've been following her for weeks." Eli sneered. "She's mine. I raised her." "You threatened her," Logan replied coldly. "You stalked her. And you came here with a knife." He cuffed Eli and called it in. By the time backup arrived, Logan was already kneeling beside Ranger, brushing snow from the shepherd's legs. The old dog was breathing heavily, tongue lolling, but there was pride in his eyes. His job had been done. Again. "You still got it," Logan whispered, rubbing behind Ranger's ears. "Still got it." At the precinct, Logan handed over evidence and filed the arrest report personally. Eli was booked, charged with stalking, unlawful possession of a weapon, and endangering a minor. There would be more to come once Maddie's full statement was entered into the system. For now, he sat in holding, muttering to himself, occasionally slamming his shoulder against the plexiglass wall. In the break room, Logan poured himself a cup of coffee but didn't drink it. He stood alone at the window, watching the snow continue to fall. Captain Rourke joined him a moment later, glancing at Ranger, who rested in a patch of heat near the vending machine. "That dog of yours still thinks he's 5 years younger," Rourke muttered. "He doesn't care how old he is," Logan replied. "He only cares about who needs him." Rourke nodded, then placed a manila envelope on the counter. "Your guardianship paperwork. CPS fast-tracked it. All it needs is your signature." Logan looked down at the form, his name typed neatly under petitioner. Maddie's name listed beside Sky's, both under protected minors. There was something quietly staggering about it. "You sure?" Rourke asked. Logan nodded. "I'm not just protecting them anymore. They're family." He signed. Later that evening, Logan returned to the safe house. Dorothy opened the door and said nothing, just stepped aside. Inside, Maddie sat on the couch, Sky sleeping on her chest. The fire crackled behind her. Ranger padded in and lay down by her feet, sighing heavily as if finally able to rest. Maddie looked up. "Was it him?" Logan nodded. "He won't come near you again." She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Thank you." Logan didn't speak. He only sat down across from her, watching as Ranger drifted into sleep. Outside, the storm was finally breaking. Inside, something had begun to heal. The courtroom in Aurora County was simple: high ceilings, pale wooden benches, and windows that looked out on the bare limbs of winter trees. Light filtered through glass that had seen decades of stories, and for once, Logan Bennett wasn't there as an officer, but as something entirely different. A guardian, a man with no badge on his chest, only a child in his care, and another soul who had found safety beneath his roof. Maddie Carter sat to his right, her shoulders back, her hands nervously clasped in her lap. She wore a soft gray sweater and jeans that looked too big for her, a donated set from the shelter. Her hair, once tangled and ragged, had been trimmed, brushed, tucked behind her ears. She still didn't speak much unless spoken to, but her eyes no longer darted toward exits or shadows. In a small carrier at her feet, baby Sky slept soundly, wrapped in a navy blue blanket with stars across the hem. He was 2 months old now, gaining weight steadily, his breathing even, his cheeks soft and round. Ranger lay beside the carrier, old paws splayed, head on the floor. He hadn't moved much that morning, but he didn't have to. His presence was enough. Across from them sat Judge Elise Hawthorne, a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair cropped short and eyes that could freeze or melt a room depending on her tone. Her robe fell in straight lines, and her voice was calm but commanding. "Ms. Carter," she said, looking at Maddie over the rim of her glasses, We have reviewed all evaluations, school records, psychological assessments, and recommendations from the Department of Child Services. You have consistently demonstrated progress, responsibility, and an unwavering commitment to your child. Under the condition of continued counseling and supervision, this court grants you custodial rights to Sky Carter, under the legal guardianship of Mr. Bennett. Logan felt something shift deep in his chest. Maddie's breath caught audibly. Judge Hawthorne turned her gaze to Logan. Mr. Bennett, do you accept full legal responsibility for the care and welfare of both minors? I do, Logan replied without hesitation. Then as of this date, she said, bringing the gavel down with a quiet thunk, you are their legal guardian. This hearing is concluded. Outside the courthouse, the sky was the color of pale silver, and the first early blooms of March fought to push through melting snow. Logan stood on the steps with Maddie beside him, holding Sky close to her chest beneath her jacket. A small group of townspeople had gathered, social workers, a few off-duty officers, even Dorothy Yates in her knitted green shawl. It wasn't a crowd, but it was a community. Captain Rourke stepped forward and clapped Logan on the back. Didn't peg you for the family type. I didn't either, Logan said with a faint smile. Then came Mayor Cecilia Blake, a woman in her 50s with a warm voice and a spine of granite. She wore a deep burgundy coat and always addressed people by name, even if she had only met them once. We've arranged a small recognition ceremony at City Hall next week, she told Logan. For the dog, too. The town could use a good story. Logan nodded, glancing down at Ranger. The dog simply blinked. That evening, for the first time, Maddie and Sky entered the little house on the outskirts of Aurora not as guests, but as family. The home was modest, 2 bedrooms, faded hardwood floors, a fireplace that crackled in the living room. On the wall above the mantel hung a new framed drawing, placed there just that morning. Maddie had worked on it quietly over the past 2 weeks, using pencils and old paper Dorothy had given her. In the image, Ranger stood tall and still beneath falling snow, his fur dusted white, and beside him, a tiny bundled baby sleeping against his side. Etched below in steady, careful print, because of one bark we lived. Logan hadn't spoken when she gave it to him. He hadn't needed to. That night, as the snow outside gave way to a soft drizzle, Logan stood in the hallway, looking in on the nursery. Sky slept in the small crib pushed against the wall. Maddie, curled under a handmade quilt on a mattress nearby, breathed in slow rhythm, her brow finally uncreased. And Ranger, old, aching, loyal, lay beneath the crib, his body forming a crescent moon around the space where the baby's feet kicked. Logan leaned on the doorframe. You never stop guarding, do you? Ranger didn't move. Just blinked once. But it was enough. The ceremony at City Hall happened 3 days later. The entire town had been invited, though Logan had hoped it wouldn't be much of a spectacle. It turned out to be just the right size, about 50 people, some curious, others reverent. The mayor stood at the podium on the small steps, microphone squeaking once before settling. Tonight, Mayor Blake began, we honor a very particular kind of hero, not one with a badge or a title, but with paws and a heart that refused to stop listening. She motioned toward Ranger, who sat at Logan's feet wearing a simple red scarf Maddie had tied around his neck. He didn't care for the attention, but he tolerated it. This dog, she continued, saved a baby from death, protected a girl from danger, and reminded an entire town that sometimes the most important instincts don't come from words, but from a bark in the dark. She turned to Logan, who stood a little stiff, uncomfortable in the spotlight. Sergeant Bennett, she said, you've served this town well, but what you've done for these 2 children, that's the kind of service that reshapes lives. Would you like to say a few words? Logan shook his head gently. I'd rather let him speak for himself, he said, glancing down at Ranger. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. But just then Ranger stood. Slowly, carefully. His legs trembled slightly, and then he lifted his head and gave a single bark, low, steady, clear. It echoed off the bricks and rooftops, not loud but resonant. The crowd went silent, and then they clapped, not for the speech, not for the man, but for the dog who had heard a cry no one else could, and answered. In a world that often rushes past quiet cries for help, sometimes it takes a single bark in the dark to awaken us to grace. This story wasn't just about a German shepherd, a broken veteran, or a frightened young mother. It was about how, through the smallest signs, a nudge from a loyal dog, a stranger's kindness, a child's breath in the cold, God whispers, "I am still here." Ranger didn't wear wings, but he was a guardian sent in fur and faith. Logan didn't set out to be a father, but grace found him anyway. Maddie didn't think she was worth saving, but love made room for her. And Sky, named after the heavens, was the miracle that tied them all together. We are reminded that miracles don't always roar. They sometimes arrive on four tired paws and in the arms of the broken, healing the wounded hearts around them. Maybe you've been Ranger, holding the line. Maybe you've been Logan, haunted and hesitant. Maybe you've been Maddie, just needing someone to believe in you. Wherever you are on that journey, God sees you. He knows your pain, your doubt, your hope. And sometimes, when we least expect it, He sends help in the most unexpected form. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that they are not alone. Comment Amen if you believe God still works through animals, people, and moments of quiet courage. Subscribe for more stories of faith, love, and the unseen hands that guide us. And tonight, when the world goes quiet, say a prayer for all the children still waiting, all the dogs still guarding, and all the hearts still hoping. May God bless you and all those who carry light into the darkness.